Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Bill Campbell. He is a former CISO for a healthcare company and current free agent as of this recording in October 2024. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career so far?
Sure. I've been around for a while. Transitioned from managing technology operations to cybersecurity back in the 1990s, actually, when I was at Fidelity Investments, and managed a couple of different functions there, and then moved on to other things. Over the course of my career, I've kind of moved back and forth between pure play cybersecurity management of various programs, and also occasionally jumping into software development management because I have a background in that as well. But in both cases where I took that little digression, I was, managing a team that was building or maintaining technologies related to security technologies. So anyway, most recently, Chief Information Security Officer of a hospital group here in Orange County, California. And had a great time there, but that ended a few months ago, and now looking for something new.
Awesome. We'll appreciate the background. So, as we usually start the show, I like to get a sense for how people view the talent gap. So would you say that it's real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
Well, I mean, maybe it'd be useful to define what we really mean by the talent gap. If I think that there may be, So to be honest with you, I think I might have even mentioned to you, Pete, that a couple of years ago I gave a presentation at the ISC Squared Global Congress, and the title of my presentation was "The Myth of the Talent Gap." But I probably was coming at that from a particular perspective. Certainly, there may be some issues at the very entry level, in our field in cybersecurity, because employers are often looking for really more than what they can expect in entry level people. They want to pay entry level, compensation, but they don't necessarily want to be the organization that develops those entry level people into something more than entry level. And so there may be some sort of a gap that's at least perceived on the hiring manager side or whatever. I think that the truth of the matter is that there is plenty of folks out there right now, especially in 2024, that are displaced, that are sort of looking for opportunities, but just not finding them. I posted recently on LinkedIn about a study that I saw. I wish I could credit the organization that did it now, but I can't think of it offhand. But we've gone from, in the last 5 years, we've gone from a situation where if 10 positions are posted and publicized, 8 of them got filled in 2019. In 2024, it's only 4 out of those 10. So we've clearly, seen a hitting of the brakes on hiring. And unfortunately, part of the evidence for that is this fact that there's jobs being posted that are not being filled. And so that may contribute to a sort of an illusion of a talent gap, because there are various folks, even IC Squared recently, the CEO of the acting CEO of IC Squared got up at the most recent Congress and cited a statistic of 1 million open positions in cybersecurity. And I can tell you that there's nobody that's actually qualified and in the field looking around who sees any evidence of that kind of a pool of open positions, or at least not that are actually being filled. It seems like there's a lot of companies that are posting these positions, but don't really have any serious intention of filling them.
Yeah, and there's a few different ways to look at it. Sometimes I think the talent gap is better framed as either an expectation gap, expectations of the candidates, the job seekers, and then expectations of the hiring managers. They can't seem to find common ground, and thus there's a gap. There's also the idea that there's a skills gap, versus I think there's talent there. in terms of the number of bodies available for security jobs, there's enough people by far. In fact, there's probably an excess right now in 2024. But the question is, do they have the exact skills for the exact job openings at this point in time? So like right now, it seems very like a very narrow set of skills that are highly in demand. You have AppSec, DevSecOps, some cloud security, some on the offensive security side, and then like OT security. Those and everybody seems to want to hire the senior individual contributors in those skill sets. I don't see much hiring happening at the executive level. Very few CISO roles, and then there's almost no hiring, it seems like, at the entry level. So, I think we're lacking as an industry some of these in-demand skills, but everybody else is saying, where are the jobs? We have all these job seekers.
Yeah. I think it's frustrating on both sides. As a hiring manager, I think, for essentially my entire career, I've always looked to hire on the basis of potential and not on the basis of checking boxes of, do they have, direct experience in this particular technology, version 1.3.6 of, XYZ or what, and it's always baffled me when hiring managers, or kind of worse yet, when we have recruiters, usually like HR, internal recruiters, who are, pretty clueless about what it actually takes to do whatever the job is, right? They don't have any real exposure to that. I can't think of a single time in my career when an HR recruiter has come into my department and actually observed, the work that gets done there. They just they have a conversation with the hiring manager, develop a job spec or whatever, and then they start trying to match that with candidates. And it's kind of a lazy and unprofessional way of approaching it, in my personal opinion. I've always tried to look for people that demonstrated that they were, enthusiastic and had a good attitude, and had the capacity to learn and everything. Now, for any given position, there might be some real, basement or whatever of certain technical skills or, familiarity with various things. But I've never been one to say, well, if they don't have, direct experience in my specific industry sector, healthcare, finance, whatever it is, that somehow they're not suitable for the position. Because if you hire the right person, they're going to be able to develop into that role. And, if you think about it, how many roles stay static anyway? I mean, if you hire somebody that exactly matches your particular job spec today, well, 6 months from now, you're going to have to rewrite that job spec. And now that person's skills that they came in with day one are no longer even relevant necessarily, or at least they're less relevant. So, I just think that, what's worked for me in the past, at least, is more of an approach of looking for, capabilities and potential than trying to establish a strict set of criteria for qualifications, whatever that means.
Yeah, well, and the longer your list of must-have requirements, the longer your time to hire, and the less likely you are to find somebody that meets all of those requirements. And I guess you kind of articulated pretty well there what my approach to recruiting has always been. I look for people that have high potential, that have high skill ceilings, not that necessarily, meet the 10 out of 10 today, but, maybe they're kind of maxed out, or they're close to being maxed out, in their professional trajectory, or, I'm looking for folks that they can perform at an adequate level today, but in a year from now, they're going to be absolutely killing it, probably promoted a couple of times, that sort of thing. And I think that served me pretty well in the companies that I've recruited for over the years. Some folks I've recruited have been there. I mean, at this point, I've been in security 10 years. There's people that I've recruited 2014 that are still in those roles, even a decade later. So I agree. I think we have too much of a narrow-minded way of hiring often as an industry. It's, we have to check all these boxes, like you said. And I think that's exacerbated too by the state of the market right now. If your internal recruiter posts a job and they get, 1,000 applicants in a week, I think the sense from the hiring team is, well, if that's the case, that's a ton of applicants. Chances are we can be as picky as we want because we have so many people applying. But often anybody who's combed through those thousands of applications will tell you there's only a small handful probably that are anywhere close to being qualified. So,
well, and I think you're absolutely right about that. I think there's another dimension to the use of. I don't know if we want to. I don't know. Do you think your listeners are totally familiar with the concept of inbound versus outbound recruiting? Should we define those terms maybe?
Yeah, I think so. It's a distinction I make often because I think a lot of the breakdown in how hiring is done in 2024 is because of an over-reliance on inbound, which it sounds like you might be in the same camp.
Yeah, absolutely. I think inbound recruiting has, due to a number of sort of conditions, factors, whatever, developments, I guess you might say, it may have worked, in the 1980s. But I would say that it's completely broken now because of basically what we see is what you're talking about there. You post a position and within 24 or 48 hours, you've got 1,000 applicants. And now you've got a pretty much, you're overwhelmed with this fire hose of applications, right? And nobody can really, cull through those in a meaningful way other than using, keyword searches or nowadays maybe some sort of AI based technologies or whatever, but you're not going to actually be able to give due consideration to each and every one of those applicants. And that's sort of mirrored on the other side, on the applicant side, with so we've developed these technologies like ATSs, applicant tracking systems, and other technologies on the hiring side, if you will, to sort of like help to cope with that fire hose. But on the other hand, it's an arms race, right, between the applicants who are now, using technologies to be able to apply much more easily and to much more quickly and to many more positions than they would otherwise. Personally, I don't employ any of those things. I only apply to positions that I feel like I am truly qualified for. And I know a lot of people that are like that too, but there are plenty of applicants out there, plenty of candidates that are just basically shotgunning. And that's how you get a lot of those clearly unqualified applicants to inbound recruiting approaches. And so my feeling is that unless you are trying to staff up a call center with 100 people overnight, inbound recruiting is probably just not the right approach at all. If you can avoid, I don't mean to violate any laws or anything like that, but if you can avoid even publicly posting a position and and just do mine LinkedIn or mine whatever data sources that you have for potential candidates, rather than waiting for people to apply, you're probably going to find better candidates. And in fact, at my most recent position as CISO at the hospital group, so I had a total staff of about 27, and over the course of the year that I spent there, I think I hired like 7 or 9 or something like that. Both there's a couple of backfills, but mostly it was expanding the team. And I was fortunate to have a partner within the HR staffing group of the company who really appreciated the value of outbound recruiting. And she did provided most of the candidates that she provided to me were folks that she had kind of found who had not just seen an ad and responded to us, that she was looking for people with the right kind of profiles. Using LinkedIn Recruiter, she was looking for people with the right kind of profiles who would also check the box of looking interested in new opportunities, whatever. And I ended up getting pretty good results out of that, better results than I've had in many other places that I've worked in terms of the effectiveness of the recruitment strategy there.
Yeah, I discovered really early on. So I started my career in IT recruiting, came over to security recruiting about a decade ago. And I tried a few different things when I came onto that audit firm. I tried Indeed at the time. I think I might have looked in Career Builder, Monster, that sort of thing, because that's what I had been using for IT recruiting. But what I very quickly discovered, and this is before the current market that we're in, is that a lot of security people don't have any resume online and they're not out there applying to jobs. So I had to find a way to find them and generate interest in them without them having much of a presence on the job board or ever fielding any applications. So I quickly switched to the outbound style and discovered a lot of success in that very quickly. I think the more specialized the role that you're recruiting for, especially something technical, like IT or security, the more valuable outbound becomes, because you have to be even more specific about the type of person that you're looking for. Whereas if you're to post a job for, say, customer service, anybody could do customer service at any number of companies, and you're probably going to get hundreds of applicants, most of which are somewhat close. But I remember when I first posted a job on Indeed, it was for an auditor, and I think I was getting like school bus drivers and hair cutters, applying to that position.
Yeah. Those are maybe a little bit of extreme examples, but I believe you. I believe that you got those kinds of things, and it's. We had a situation where things really changed in the early 90s, right? This may have even been before you started your career, but with the advent of the World Wide Web, one of the first popular applications on the web, or popular sites on the web, was the Monster board. It's not necessarily as big of a player as it used to be, but once upon a time in the mid 90s, it was like the place. Before that, the closest thing we had was UUNet groups for jobs, which did give you sort of like national exposure, even international exposure. But as a candidate, you still had to actually look you had to be intelligent about your search or whatever. And as a hiring manager, or as a hiring entity, you had to be intelligent about your sourcing. And then before this, because I can remember trying to hire a supervising, operations supervisor once when I was first at Fidelity and still in IT operations. And, I posted display ads in 3 major newspapers in the markets that we figured we could find people in DC, New York, and Boston. And I got 0 responses, 0, Fast forward about 2 years, and now there's, the Monster board and some of its emerging competitors or whatever. You post something, and now you're getting dozens, and today you get thousands, literally. And so there's no way that you can rationally cull through that many applicants, many of which are the bus drivers. Nothing against bus drivers, but they're great to drive buses, but they're not great for, being a security engineer or something like that, right? Generally speaking. But I hired weird people too. One of the people that I hired in my last job was actually a PhD theoretical physicist that I hired as a security engineer. He had pursued that, education path, to get a PhD in theoretical physics, and I don't even really know what that means, to be honest with you. But he also, decided that he wanted to make a career change. He was still relatively young. I'm going to say he was in his 30s or something like that, and he, a smart guy, had pursued, studies to do, I can't remember exactly what his immediately preceding occupation, or his position was prior to being hired by us. But he really impressed us in the interviews, and he did a great job. He ended up being one of our, top contributors, solving some problems with, automated device inventory and things like that. So, great.
Yeah, so I think intelligence, ability to learn, some of these less tangible things than like technical skill, having worked with a specific SIM or whatever the case may be. These types of factors, I think, matter more in terms of somebody's ability to do a job in the long term. But we've gotten in such a habit, I think, of just hiring for that technology stack and nothing else, or hiring also only from direct competitors. That's something that I see a lot.
I see.
Yeah, but again, that narrows your candidate pool down to such a small amount. I guess we kind of talked about this before. We have thousands of applicants to each job. I've been talking to internal recruiters lately. They're having their internal recruiters work on 20, 25 open jobs at once, and each open job's getting 500 plus applicants. Like you said, that's a lot to parse through. So I think that's where that outbound recruiting really needs to come in. It's just more efficient for both the applicant or the job seeker.
Yeah. And I'll concede that it's probably more work for the recruiter to engage. It takes more sort of intellectual effort to think about things like, well, I don't know. I am absolutely not a fisherman, but I have this idea that people that go fishing, they figure out like where the best places to fish are, or like where the fish are to go drop their line in or whatever, and we need to do more of it instead of just doing the easy thing, the simple and easy thing of just like posting something on a job board, whether it's or whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's on any of the other Indeed, any of the other ones. It's actually worth the effort. And frankly, I can't believe that it's not more interesting to pursue that kind of a search on the. You can tell me because you're in the business. I mean, isn't that more interesting work than just culling through 1,000 resumes? Isn't it more intellectually engaging and fun to do?
Yeah,
even if it's harder.
Yeah, I mean, for me it is, but then again, I'm also highly analytical, and I think strategically and stuff like that. I think the barrier to entry to the recruiting profession, honestly, is maybe a little bit too low. So you get people in the business who maybe shouldn't be in the business, but I think to truly do effective outbound recruiting, it requires quite a bit of research on the front end, either for the specific role that you're recruiting for, if you've never done it before, or just having years and years of experience. Coming through over the years. So, but all of that leads up to being able to construct a more strategic, a better strategy for finding these folks. In fact, I have an example of this. Recently, was doing some work on the side for a friend's construction company, and they had never had a recruiter before or anything. They didn't really know what to expect. But I kept telling them, look, we just need to find the honey hole where the candidates are that are a fit for your open sales job. It's door-to-door sales, full commission. That's a tough sell. So in my mind, I was trying to think of, okay, what are some jobs where people already work on 100% commission? Maybe they're 1099 or whatever, and they're comfortable with sales, following a script, that sort of thing. And I immediately thought of real estate agents and insurance producers, insurance salespeople. So started reaching out to those types of folks, and sure enough, had a better hit rate with those types of individuals versus, customer service folks that weren't used to working on commission, that sort of thing. But it does require a lot of thought, I think, to do recruiting properly. Why people don't do it more, I couldn't tell you. But yeah, for me, it's certainly more fulfilling to do it that way.
Yeah. I think you're right that the barrier to entry in the recruiting field is at least seemingly too low, because the evidence just being that there's so many people out there kind of scrabbling and engaging in really questionable practices too, where, I can't tell you how many times, even daily or whatever, I get contacted by, on the one hand, maybe I should give them credit because they're doing outbound recruiting. They're reaching out to me and saying, we got this thing we want to fill. But what they're not saying is that they actually have no relationship whatsoever with the hiring entity. All right. And really what they're just doing is what they've done is they've inserted themselves in a kind of a middleman, intermediation position, where they have discovered that, a particular company is hiring a position. They've managed to somehow they've even harvested a job description off of the company website or whatever, and then they go out and they mine LinkedIn or something like that to find some candidates, get an RTR for that candidate, get a right to represent for that candidate, and then submit to the hiring company, hoping that they can finagle a commission out of it afterwards. And this has turned out to be a surprisingly common business model I'm discovering in the last several months or whatever. And I'm surprised that it works at all. But obviously these companies stay in business. So
there's actually a name for it. They call that MPC, M as in I don't know what the military is, but they call it MPC, most placeable candidate marketing in the recruiting business. So the idea being, just like you said, you get somebody that you think has a hot skill set, then you market them out to would-be hiring managers to try and gain a new client. But yeah, like you said, they don't have an existing relationship with that client. That's why I've always been pretty reluctant to do that sort of thing, even though my ex-business partner said that that's kind of an industry best practice, is because there's no existing relationship. They don't know me. They don't trust me. And in a lot of cases, I think the candidates being marketed are having their trust violated because they're not sending the recruiter a rate to represent for. I mean, I think it should be done on a per job basis. So their resume isn't being blasted out to jobs they would have no interest in whatsoever. I think job matches should be made on an individual basis, and it should be, two-way street. It should be a conversation. And I think the volume game doesn't necessarily benefit anyone. That's kind of the old way of doing recruiting, I guess, is to, it's a numbers game. Just blast as many resumes out as you can, or send an email blast and just try and hit as many people as you can. It might depend too on industry. In InfoSec, it's all about trust and who you know and these relationships.
Yeah. So. I mean, certainly, I mean, as a hiring manager, I would be very sus of somebody that just sort of reached out to me out of the blue and said, I've got this candidate. I can't think of an instance in which I have, actually ended up hiring somebody when I was approached that way as a hiring manager. But maybe I'm weird. I don't know. I mean, all I know is what I know, and maybe there's, all kinds of people out there that are willing to engage on that basis. I'd be a little bit surprised, but like I say, I admit that I have a narrow perspective, which is limited by my own personal experience, and so sometimes I get pushback from people on things that I posted on LinkedIn, for example, and they'll say, well, what about this situation? And I'll go, well, you're probably right. I've just never encountered that situation.
Yeah, I mean, certainly our experience informs our not just our worldview, but how we view best practices. For me, I used to have to do email blasts. So once I had the opportunity to stop doing them and saw how much better received my emails and in-mails were, I discovered, hey, I should have been doing this all along, but I didn't have the option really to do that when I was at the huge corporate staffing firm that I was at. That was just a part of business, the way we did it, because it was all about the numbers, the KPIs. But I think anytime you focus too much on KPIs, you drive behaviors that aren't great and that lead to worse outcomes in a lot of different ways. But I think a lot of recruiting is it's recruiting managers from the old school, that believe that it's all about as many touches as humanly possible versus.
Yeah, or that, if you just cast your net wide enough, you're going to find that unicorn. You're going to find that, perfect candidate or whatever. And, that sort of leads into another topic, which I am frustrated with, where I see too many hiring managers. They'll find a candidate that is quite suitable for the position that they are trying to fill, but they will continue to look because, it's like a FOMO kind of thing, where they're like, well, what if the next candidate that I see is even better, And I just think that's a bad recruiting strategy, a bad management strategy that, every day that you wait puts the suitable candidate at risk for flight to, another opportunity. And it's disrespectful to your current staff because presumably you're hiring not just to put a button, a seat someplace, but rather to actually, sort of distribute the workload within your organization, right? That there's a reason why you're hiring this person that has a business purpose, and it's not just about, being personally gratified because you found the perfect person or whatever. I don't think you're ever going to find the perfect person anyway, and I just think that's a bad strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think quick, decisive hiring decisions are necessary when you're dealing with people that have many options. That's one thing I've seen very, very often over the years. Back when GRC was a much hotter skill set than it is currently. DFIR consultants, these folks have 5-10 different firms courting them at any given time because they'll only hire people from competing firms. So, when they have that many options, you have to move quick and you have to be decisive, or you lose people. I've lost count the number of times I've told hiring managers that, and it seems to fall on deaf ears for the most part.
Well, I mean, but I guess my reaction to that is that, when have you ever seen true accountability for being, for the, okay, if you and I at least can agree that sort of dragging your feet on recruitment when you have a suitable candidate damages the company in various ways. That damage is, generally speaking, kind of intangible. You can't really trace it to the bottom line on a P&L statement or something, And accordingly, I would argue that very few hiring managers who engage in that kind of what I would call bad management, bad recruiting practices, they're never held accountable for that. So why would they change what they're doing? They're only going to change if they have the epiphany that and maybe they care enough about the company more than themselves or something like that, so that they're willing to move ahead with the hire. There may be some folks that are actually even under some pressure from their management and their finance people or whatever to delay hiring just to sort of save money by leaving the position open or whatever. I think we talked about a post that I put up a month or two ago on LinkedIn where I was sort of articulating a list of the we have this essential collapse of the cyber job market in 2024 for all intents and purposes, and everybody's acknowledging it, but nobody seems to know exactly why it's happening, and so there's been a lot of speculation about it, and there's various reasons that have been offered, and some of those speculations, some of those hypotheses have involved, sort of virtue signaling. One hypothesis is that it's virtue signaling to investors. Look, we're hiring, we're growing, Well, I don't know any investors that actually use that as a criteria, so I doubt that that's probably the reason. However, there's another form of virtue signaling, which is a signaling to your existing staff, your people that are probably overextended already right now, and saying, look, we're trying to hire, but we just can't find the right person, and blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, you don't really hire them, and you don't have to pay out your biggest cost is almost always your staff. So, in almost any company, your biggest expense is compensation costs. And so, if you're kind of on the red line in terms of your business, revenues and whatever, your financials, maybe it looks appealing to sort of like, if your people are complaining that they need more help and you don't really want to invest in that, maybe it makes sense to sort of post the position and just not fill it. I don't know. That's at least a plausible explanation that I can think of. I'm not sure that it's true of every single unfilled position out there, but that may be what some people are doing.
Yeah, I think it certainly happens. The question is how widespread is that? I'm hearing a lot of, we don't have additional budget or headcount this year as much as I would like to hire. In which case, if you're the hiring manager in that situation, you got to do something to try and keep your existing staff sticking around. I mean, you could use fear, the state of the market. Hey, you could leave, but you might not be able to find something else. I guess that's one tactic. Mm-hmm. Or you could do like you said and post the position and tell them that we're trying to fill it and not really.
Well, I mean, they don't have to leave to cause a hit on your productivity. There's such a thing as quiet quitting. There's such a thing as work to rule. There's such a thing as there's all kinds of things. If you're not doing right by your employees, then there's all kinds of things that they can do to sort of like at least slow down their productivity. They don't have to continue to bust their butts all 24 hours a day or whatever. So yeah, there are. I agree. There are ways of sort of negotiating that, and sometimes it might be that you have to stand up as a leader, get up on your hind legs, and tell your corporate overlords that they're given the support that they are offering in terms of money for compensation, staffing, and whatever. They have they have to be realistic about their expectations for what can be delivered in a given period of time. Sometimes you just have to go back and say, look, you might really, really want, this new feature to be deployed or whatever. But, in order to do that, we're either going to have to take more time, or we're going to have to deprioritize other things and do this instead. But, you can't just have everything be a priority and everything due next Tuesday. You got to be realistic about this.
Well, and I think we had talked about this before. I think a lot of the challenges we see in hiring and budgeting and everything really within security this year is, everybody's trying to do more with less. Well, where does that stem from? It stems from the idea that security is a cost center. And I think you see that borne out in the types of openings that are being hired for right now relative to the other security positions. It's either vendors hiring for sales or to develop a product that they can then sell and make a profit from. It's things that are enabling profits versus pure cost centers. And I think that's what we're seeing in the job postings and my competitors that are staying busy with certain types of roles. Any thoughts on how we can, mitigate the mindset of cost center?
Well, what you're describing, of course, security as a cost center is something that I've been keenly aware of for my entire career, and I've never been one. I've always been sort of like, I've had a little bit of an ick factor, a little bit of, I just threw up in the back of my mouth a little bit when I see various salespeople trying to use fear-based, approaches and fear-based marketing or whatever. Because, it is absolutely true that very, very few companies make money by being more secure, right? You may be able to avoid losses by being adequately secure, but where is that threshold between what you really want to do is just barely invest enough to keep yourself safe, and not a penny more, really. That's the ideal when you've got a cost center like that, like security. So, the only thing that I do in terms of internally in trying to sell programs to the purse string holders, the business decision makers who make the decision is I recognize a couple of things. One of which is that as an information risk management professional, my fundamental responsibility is number one is that I'm in an advisory role. I don't get to make the decisions for the business. So what I have to do is provide the best advice I can to those decision makers. And I also have a little bit of a moral and regulatory responsibility to make sure that those decisions are made by the right person. And that right person is the person who has accountability for the consequences of those decisions. So obviously you don't want, the receptionist to make decisions about cybersecurity that put the entire enterprise at risk or whatever. That's sort of an extreme example, but if you know what I mean. If something is actually if the decision to accept a risk is a risk that affects the entire enterprise, well, really, the top of the enterprise is who has to make the decision, the CEO. If it really only can be limited to a particular division or functional area of the company, then maybe a lower level decision maker can make that decision to accept the risk. But what I would do, for example, if I had like a department head that wanted to do a certain thing and I recognized that thing, whatever they're trying to do, would put the remainder of the enterprise at risk, I would go to that person and have a kind of a little heart to heart with them and say, look, I understand what you're doing. Well, first I would understand what they're doing. I would try to, get a good understanding of what they're trying to do for the business. What is this? What's the benefit that they're trying to get by doing this thing, deploying this technology, offering this product, whatever it is, right? And I'd say, I really appreciate what you're doing for the company here. However, what I see from my perspective in cybersecurity is that it's opening up a risk that could affect, the entire enterprise. So I need to do a couple of things. We either need to figure out how to reduce that risk, internally within your department so that we don't have, or I need to get sort of approval from all the other affected areas or the top person in order to, because if if I don't get, sort of your cooperation to reduce the risk, to manage that risk, then, I'm going to have to at least inform them so that they know that you are taking this risk on their behalf. And, that approach usually is, unless you're dealing with a lunatic, the people understand that they can't just put other people at risk for their own benefit, and so they're willing to work with that. And they also don't like the idea necessarily of being, sort of put on report by, having the cyber guy go tattle on them to other people or whatever. So that's usually a good approach to incentivize people to rethink what they're doing and to work with us. Our job also is in that advisory role to say, well, here are some ways that we can, here's some controls that we can put in place that would reduce that risk to an acceptable level or whatever. So that, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit too philosophical for the question that you asked, but that's kind of the approach that I've taken in the past.
No, I love it. And I would imagine you have to find a way to quantify security risks and I don't know, assign a dollar figure to them. Like, how do you make it?
Well, so the thing is, that's, I don't know, you're touching on some other areas that have been explored for a long time in this field. You've probably heard of ROSI, return on security investment. There have been various attempts to quantify risk. The only one that seems to have any real potential for working is something called FAIR, Factor Analysis of Information Risk, because it employs some modeling methodologies underpinning that help you to quantify things that are not really very quantifiable. Okay, a lot of what we do in information risk is just it's not really quantifiable. How do you quantify the damage to your reputation as a business? How many dollars did it cost you to have that bad article in the New York Times or whatever? Nobody knows that number. So. But the good news is that most of the people that we deal with, the business decision makers, they do risk management every single day. Okay, they do it at least intuitively, sort of implicitly. And so when we approach them from a sort of a foundation of information risk management, as opposed to like an alternative that might be just compliance. We have to be compliant with these regulations, with these standards, with these guidelines, whatever. And so, I'm here to tell you that you're not compliant. You got to get compliant, right? That message does not resonate with business decision makers, period, full stop. And I'm not saying that you don't have to be compliant with legal requirements. You do, but it really matters a lot how you get there. And if you just try to go directly there and say, well, we have to meet this requirement for HIPAA or GLBA or whatever your regulatory framework is, right? If you just say that, then people kind of go, yeah, maybe, whatever, I want to get around to it. Whereas, if you go and say, look, we have a business responsibility to manage the risk, that we face, all the risks that we face. One of those risks, one of those operational risks is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is intended to address, and let's talk about it in those terms. And risk management is, it's a whole complex subject that you can probably get a PhD in or whatever. But the basics of it are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And like I say, it may very well be that the business decision maker that you're working with has an explicit understanding that they've studied risk management as a discipline, or maybe they've just got an implicit understanding of it because that's kind of what they do all day long when they think about, okay, what is the probability of this happening and what's the impact if it does happen and where does it fall in that two-dimensional field or whatever, and if it's up in the upper right-hand corner, highly probable and highly impactful, I probably need to do something about it. If it's down in the lower left-hand corner, not very probable, and not very impactful, even if it does happen, well, maybe that's something I can kind of look the other way on, or I can prioritize other things. So, that kind of risk management approach, I think, is absolutely key. And this may not have a whole lot to do with recruiting or whatever, but it's how I operate, when I'm in that kind of a role. And I think that it's certainly in my experience, it works far, far better than just coming in and saying, hey, I'm from cybersecurity and I'm here to tell you, no, you can't do that, So, which is unfortunately the approach that some people take. And I can't explain it.
Well, I mean, I think about all this from the recruiter's perspective, talking to would-be clients, they'd like to hire in a lot of cases. They simply don't have the budget or the headcount to work with. So
Sure.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if there's a way to solve that problem or help them solve that problem. When they're
and you're not the only person that's thought about this. One of the big issues is that, if you look at like a large enterprise, they're probably spending about, if they take their whole budget, their entire budget, because these days almost any company, no matter what industry sector they're in, they are a technology company, whether they want to admit it or not. Everything that's competitive advantages that we offer to our customers, regardless of industry, are almost always determined by how we employ technologies. But the IT department budget is usually about 10%. That's sort of like, it's give or take, and it varies a little bit by industry sector, but 10% of the total budget goes to IT, and then 6% of that budget goes to cyber. That's, across a lot of different companies, and mostly large companies, okay? So if you look at that and you consider 0.6% of total budget going to cybersecurity, and if you think about like an intermediate level security engineer, one, fully burdened, costing what, $200,000 a year, something like that. All right, fully burdened. If their salary plus all the benefits and everything else, the cost of actually hiring somebody. Let's say it's $200,000 for somebody like a security engineer with 8 to 10 years of experience in one of the major markets of the United States. I'm not talking about Podunk, Idaho, or whatever. Okay. So it's probably up to, so you take that to 200,000 and do a quick calculation here. So 200,000 divided by 0.006, right? So you're looking at a company that can afford to hire a single full-time intermediate security engineer has got an annual budget of over $30 million, $33 million, something like that. Okay. How many companies in the United States, as a percentage of all the companies, have a budget of over 300? It's less than 1% of companies in the United States that have that kind of a budget. Okay. So, the problem is that it's a specialized field. The people that work in it expect to be compensated based on their contribution and their expertise that they have and that sort of thing. And yet, if it only makes sense to invest 0.6% of your total budget in cyber, those things just don't connect ever. It's never going to connect. You're not going to get, even if you get somebody. I don't know. There have been explorations in like fractional CISOs and things like that. Call them fractional CISOs. They're not really CISOs, of course, at all, fractional or otherwise, because they're the only security person on the staff of that particular company, and maybe they're spending one day a week or one day a month or whatever it is, and so they're not a chief anything. All right, that's ridiculous. That's another problem in our field too, is the inflation of the title CISO to cover anybody who works in security. But we can talk about that another day. The problem is that there just seems to be an economic disconnect between what it costs to do, cybersecurity, and what the available budget because it doesn't make sense to spend half your budget on cyber, right? Nobody, like we talked before, nobody makes money by being more secure or whatever. They just run the risk of losing money if they're not secure enough.
Yeah, and I guess this would be a tangent. We don't have to go down this road, but I think that's why a lot of companies just, instead of going above and beyond to be more truly secure, whatever that means, they resort to doing the most clear-cut thing that they can and just being minimally compliant and just checking those boxes and trying to do it as fast and as cheap as possible. And then they can say, hey, well, look,
it's a little bit of a CYA kind of maneuver where it's like, and that's even true in hiring, right? One of the speculations about why companies are posting positions that they don't intend to hire for is that in the event of a breach, they may be able to use that as part of their excuse to say, well, we had this breach, but, we were trying to hire people, but we just couldn't find the right folks or whatever. We were doing our best or whatever, even though they really weren't doing their best, right? They were just cynically posting positions that they didn't intend to fill. So that might be like a preemptive move on the part of some companies. Again, like you said before, the question is how widespread it is. There's probably a combination of all these factors going on out there. I think the biggest factor is probably just uncertainty about the economy. Right now, the United States economy being sort of tied to the political environment, there's a lot of uncertainty in the United States right now for the next few months at least, till we see how things shake out in the beginning of 2025. I think there's a lot of people that are just not comfortable with making commitments to full-time hires under those economic conditions.
I will say I've also noticed an uptick in contract positions in security as well, whereas, 2-3 years ago, that would be almost unheard of. Everybody wanted their security staff. It was either hire full-time security staff or hire an MSSP or both. Rarely was it, we're going to hire somebody on a contract basis. But yeah, companies are not wanting to invest in security for the long term in high dollar amounts right now, seemingly.
Sure. Yeah.
We'll see what it's going to happen like in 2025. Well, we're coming up on time here, Bill. So just one last question for you. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Well, I think that we have covered in our conversation so far the most important things. I think that there are just some bad hiring practices out there. There are just some bad philosophies, bad opinions about things apparently that are reflected in the fact that we have this 4 to 10 ratio of actual hires to posted positions. I think that's evidence enough that there's a problem. If you're only hiring 40% of the positions that are posted, now individual companies, of course, there may be some companies out there that aren't engaging in this at all. That they're hiring pretty much 100% of the posts that they put out there. But obviously, there's a lot. In order to shift that statistic so far over 5 years from 80% to 40%, and I don't think we can blame the pandemic or any other factors for that. I think that what we're seeing is kind of late stage capitalism, extraction economy kind of decision making, and that is short term. It's like what's going to look good on our quarterly earnings call or whatever for profit companies, and even companies that are not publicly traded or whatever have similar decision making processes that are probably a little bit short-sighted. I guess maybe the only other thing that we didn't cover was the lack. We talked about the lack of accountability for bad hiring decisions or bad hiring processes. We didn't talk about the lack of accountability for cybersecurity itself. That's another issue that is an ongoing problem in our field. It's very, very difficult to identify instances where a company has made, decisions to underfund or deprioritize or mismanage cybersecurity, resulting in a breach that had caused damage to customers or the company or society somehow, the community. Those things happen on a fairly frequent basis, but you can point to almost zero cases where the decision to do the deprioritization or the defunding resulted in accountability for the person that made that decision. It's always framed and characterized as, oh well, we're the victims of this thing, whatever it was. Either it's a hack or it's a natural disaster that caused something or whatever. And there's never any accountability for failing to anticipate what is easily anticipatable, which is that we're all going to get breached at some point. So I don't know what to do about that one either.
Well, we'll keep working on it. That's a great point, Bill. We'll appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.